The spiritual ego is a tough one to catch, but here's 3 things that you should really know about the spiritual ego. Now I'm going to leave the most important one till last, and before we dive into this subject matter, which is going to be spiritual ego and how we can catch it, I want to introduce you to the free offerings that we have down below. There's a free breathing practice which is sure to stoke up some prana in the system. There's a free community for awakening souls going through their own process. If you want some comfort or some, I suppose, community, you're more than welcome to join us there. It's either on Facebook or Discord. And there's a free introduction to Hatha Yoga down below as well, should you wish, if that's the way that you want to go with it, either yoga or breathing practices. Both is great. And down below there's a free application form if you're wanting to take the next step in your journey and you're ready to have somebody help you or guide you on the journey. You're more than welcome to apply for our 6-month immersion training, and the application form is down below. Back to the video. The first thing we should know about the spiritual ego is that it's exactly the same as a normal ego. It just has a nobler pursuit, isn't it? It's just changed its clothing, really, is essentially what it's done. It's gone from worldly thinking patterns of I'm better than you, or I'm worse than you, or I have more money and that makes me better, etc., blah blah blah, to spiritual judgments like I'm more spiritually advanced than you, or whatever, and things like this. Spiritual comparisons, etc., spiritual judgments. And so we are wanting to look out for this one, obviously, but he's harder to catch. And the reason he's harder to catch, or she, is because he has a spiritual clothing brand now. He's Nike spiritual rather than just Nike. And so we accept him as true because we think it's truth, but in fact it isn't truth. It's just another flourishing of the ego, just with a different clothing on. So the thing we should know, the first thing we really should know about the spiritual ego is it's a shapeshifter. Now we recognize that the ego has this power to be able to elude us, doesn't it? And it's also fair to say that we learn about this on the job. You know, nobody's perfect. We're all going through our own process at our own rates and speeds, etc. And this is something that's really learned whilst we go along. Sometimes we miss the ego. We think the ego is true or whatever, and it's so easy for us to get caught up into that identity, isn't it, and believe it as fact. And in fact, it loves to be right as well, doesn't it? Which makes it even more difficult to discern because we believe we're always right. And so it's quite a difficult thing to see. But especially when it becomes a spiritual ego, it's a shapeshifter. It's shifted its form from a normal ego to something more spiritual. And because it holds that spiritual flavor, it feels true, and it feels strict, and it feels restrictive. Sometimes it can come in the form of spiritual expectations of oneself, like I must be vegan, and if I don't do any of these things then I'm not spiritual at all, which is completely not true. It's more conscious to be vegetarian or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily make you not spiritual, because in essence we're all spirit manifested in physical form, and that's important to note. So the spiritual ego is a shapeshifter. It will have a nobler pursuit, which is spirituality, than the normal ego, but it will still be judging others spiritually, comparing with others spiritually, and believing it's better spiritually than everybody else, and therefore it must give advice or whatever. And we recognize this in ourselves, don't we? Or maybe we don't. But in time we certainly will. The second thing we really should know about the spiritual ego, and I've mentioned this already, it really is no different than a normal ego. The ego's intention is to protect us, isn't it? And it's the same with the spiritual ego. The spiritual ego is trying to protect us, either from the wrath of God, or it's trying to protect us from not seeming as spiritual as we should, or something like this. And so it can be very hard to detect. The third thing, and the most important thing, I think, about the spiritual ego that we may not notice at the start, and it has taken me a very long time to realize, is that the ego will play God. Now at the start, let's say we have a big blast of Shakti in the system that we might call a Kundalini awakening. It might have a Messiah complex, the ego, and it might believe that we're a special chosen one or something like this, or with the reincarnation of Jesus, or whatever crazy stuff the mind will play up inside of ourselves. But this is quite a gross, dense thing that we're talking about here, and we're not really looking at this today. We're looking at something that's a bit more subtle. It will also play God. Have you ever done something that you didn't really want to do, but you did it because you thought God wanted you to? This is spiritual ego, and this takes quite a fair amount of discernment to be able to notice. And so we think we're not living from our ego. So, ego is about protection. I said that a moment ago. And sometimes the spiritual ego can want to protect us from the wrath of God, right? And so we do the things that we don't want to do because we believe that my voice in my head is God. We make a little God out of it, rather than really surrendering to the higher power. And what does that really mean? It means surrendering to the process that's happening right now. It doesn't mean doing anything crazy or insane because we think God wants us to. No. It just means surrendering to this moment. Surrendering to your Dharma, or your Dharma just means your work, really, or your life's purpose. So, I hope this helps. Well, the spiritual ego is crafty, and if you want some extra help with it, the best place for that is going to be the 6-month coaching, because we can have a look. And the intuition in this one, we'll pick up on things as we go. And if that's something that you're finding hard to catch, then this could be the most appropriate thing for you. I hope this helps. Have yourself a really lovely day, and namaste.